Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on Nearshoring 101, What, Why, and How, an overview of nearshoring, its benefits, and why Mexico is an attractive destination for manufacturing. This is the first in a series of webinars by the Nearshore company in Prima, and we're thrilled to have you all join us today and for future sessions. My name is Callie, and I'll be introducing today's session and speakers. Today we have with us Arnold, an expert from the Nearshore company, and Gabby and Daniel from Prima. I'll share a bit more about our speakers, and then we'll dive right in. Arnold is the Executive Vice President of Business Development at the Nearshore Company and is a senior operations professional with more than 20 years of management experience in consumer goods manufacturing and food products. He brings to the Nearshore Company a successful track record of managing international manufacturing, worldwide sourcing and procurement, and quality control. Gabby is the head of growth and revenue at Prima. Prior to Prima, Gabby spent time at Fair, a US-based B2B unicorn marketplace and Bain & Company, in addition to having studied, worked, and lived both in the United States and Mexico. And lastly, Daniel is co-founder and co-CEO of Prima. Daniel is a leader in the Mexican industrial technology and startup ecosystem, having founded 2 startups in Mexico funded by top international investors, bringing over $200 million into Mexico. And he also brings experience investing and operating in the manufacturing ecosystem, both in the US and Mexico. Thank you to the 3 of us for joining. We're super excited to hear what you have to say about nearshoring, and I'll kick it over to you all.
Thanks, Callie. Hi, Danny. Hi, Arnold. How are you?
Hey, long time.
Hi.
Amazing. So I'd like to kick this webinar with Arnold, you telling us more about the Nearshore company for those that joined today that may not know your trajectory of more than 20 years in business and what you do.
Yes, the Nearshore company has been in business for over 30 years. We're based out of the border with Texas and Mexico, and we work with clients to help them establish reliable manufacturing operations in Mexico. Particularly, we pride ourselves in our flexibility, working to provide benefits for companies as small as 20 employees to multinational operations.
Amazing. And Danny, do you want to talk a little bit more about what we do at Prima?
For sure. I would love to. Hi, everyone. For those of us that were on the prior webinars, it's great to see you again. And I hope this time we get different questions, but it's good to see so many repeated faces. So we'll try to ensure that we give a little bit of a different angle in this conversation. So basically, Prima started for a very simple reason. Back in the 90s, we all thought Mexico was gonna be this superpower, and there was a lot of Kool-Aid flowing from 1990 to 1994 until the tequila crisis hit us, right? And then during 30 years, manufacturing got depleted, talent, technology, and capital went away from the country. There are exceptions, not all exceptions, like the automotive industry and a couple others, but in general, it was depleted, ending with an ecosystem of small and medium enterprises that were owner-operated, completely overwhelmed. You could call them even Swiss Army operators, with 5% banking penetration in terms of loans, completely overwhelmed in terms of quotations, and lack of engineering talent. This resulted in an on-time in full delivery rate of the country of 30%, compared to 90% in the US. So when you think about it, you say, okay, fine, this is all understandable. But how is this incremental demand coming from the Chinese decoupling, which no one expected, but now it turns out Mexico has a second chance against all odds 30 years later to build a manufacturing powerhouse. But when you look at the state of the Mexican SME, some things don't add up. So we realized we needed to bring in an intermediary, a supply chain and manufacturing integrator that through layers of engineering, procurement, financing, and a bunch of other logistic and supply chain benefits could elevate a selected part of the ecosystem and allow us to fulfill and to really help Mexico accomplish its destiny in this decade. That's kind of why we started Prima and why we try to do with every day of our lives.
And I'd love for you both to talk more about some examples of clients that you work with. But first, I do want to go a little bit basic because we have a lot of people joining that didn't join our previous webinars, and they're joining the first of this series of webinars that we're doing, Prima and the Nearshore company together. And I do want to go back to what is nearshoring and why has it become so popular in the last 12 to 18 months, and everyone is talking about nearshoring. So either of you want to take it away?
Sure, absolutely. Nearshoring refers to the practice of moving a business operation to a nearby country, typically one that shares a border or shares a region. You do this in order to eliminate some of the shipping, travel cost. You get shorter lead times, improve communication because you're in the same time zone and proximity. A lot of times there's cultural issues where you have similarity within the same region. So all of that facilitates smoother, more fluid business interactions. And additionally, nearshoring can help companies mitigate risks such as long global supply chains, geopolitical tensions, or natural disasters.
What are the type of companies that benefit more from nearshoring? Arnold, what have you seen?
Well, I've seen everything from small Midwest companies that are having problems hiring employees to large multinational operations that want to shorten their supply chain and mitigate the risks. When we had COVID, it really put everybody on alert, and it really created a big red flag where the supply chains were so long, and you had the containers were taking so long to come across. So what happens is the small companies, many of them had to close because of the waiting for containers coming from overseas, the long lead times. So they had to close because they didn't have any inventory. Large multinationals, even large automakers had to stop because of supply chain issues. So that creates a big red flag out there. And for many companies, nearshoring is the solution.
I think, Arnold, you touch in a very interesting part. I think let's go back. I tried to go back in history. I won't back a couple thousand years, but I will go back a couple decades. The world went deflationary for a long time. And that ended up in companies going public and having a cost-cut mentality at all costs, and everything that matters is the bottom line, cut. And since the world had a deflationary environment, that was kind of made sense during it. Now that we're going back to an inflationary environment, it's kind of easier to justify making decisions that are not purely based on cost. Why? Because you had a couple of years where there's nothing more expensive than not having a product to sell. So we have seen in a lot of our customers, and we have some joint customers with the Nearshore company, that companies have shifted away from the just-in-time mentality that was so prevalent in the last couple of decades to a just-in-case mentality. So they're looking at Mexico and saying, okay, what happens if anything else happens in the Pacific Ocean or in any of the oceans? If you think about the last 3 years of history, every 6 months we have a new phenomenon. The Suez Canal dried up. There was a ship stuck in the Suez Canal. The Panama Canal dried up. You had pirates in some part in the Red Sea. There was a blockage in China. Now you have the Taiwan tensions. There's the port issue. Like, all we know now is that ocean freight is no longer reliable. And whether we like it or not, regardless of the government, Mexico shares a 3,000-kilometer border with the U.S. And that is not going anywhere. And the other reality is that the U.S. blue-collar workforce has been shifting away to more rewarding jobs than welding or truck driving. So the U.S. is out of workers, the border is there, and the ocean is no longer reliable. This means two things: that American companies can either invest in automation or they can outsource to Mexico. That's it. There are no other solutions. Whatever we believe in, whatever contract this is just going to become more and more a reality over the next couple of decades. With this in mind, we believe that if we allow to elevate the Mexican ecosystem, we will be able to serve these customers in time. So nearshoring, sadly, I do not believe is optional for many companies. I think disruptions will be incrementally disruptive at an incremental pace. I won't say exponential, but maybe. So nearshoring is the only alternative to have a reliable supply chain in the US. The world has shifted away from globalization towards regionalization. And together as a hemisphere, we have to provide solutions to ensure that products flow to where customers need them. And that is just the reality of the world we live in. This is a multi-decade trend, and we just have to be prepared to face the music and start building enough operations that allow us to fulfill that reality.
And I think
Yeah.
it's sorry, I think it's also, you see the real world realities of what Daniel's talking about. I have clients that have come to us and have told us we have positions in the US that are advertised starting at $15 to $23 an hour that they can't fill. And when you get to the point where you can't fill positions, no matter what the salaries are, you have to find an alternative. And when COVID came around, a lot of us had the issues of having to shut down operations or having to wait on things. We have a very good example in our client list where we have a company that was a PPE provider for the medical field. As you can imagine, during COVID, that the amount of demand increased exponentially. But because they were right on the border, they had a very tight supply chain. They did not have to wait for containers to come across from China. They did not have to worry about whether the ports are going to offload them or not. And that company more than doubled their production without losing a single day having to close for the COVID pandemic. So that's a perfect example of how utilizing nearshore will allow you to keep your doors open even when you have something like a pandemic happen.
As in your position, Gabby, in revenue and growth, do you see this impacting your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned incremental, and I think that's a key word. I think the ecosystem is going to move incrementally towards nearshoring, but I also think every company is going to move incrementally, and they're going to have their own road to nearshoring, right? Arnold is talking about medical supply PPE company. We had one client that sells products by catalog, and they're sourcing a ton of it from China. And yes, maybe there are some products that they're okay waiting for the containers to come, and if they're delayed, they'd rather take that risk so that the cost remains low. But then you may have products that you didn't know were going to have a big impact or a big demand, right? And if you're sourcing them from China and you have to wait 6 weeks for them to come, then you're losing on actual revenue. And so that's like a very specific example where it might not be life-threatening to lose on a product, but it is impacting the top line of a company, even though the worry may be on the bottom line and they don't want to increase their costs per unit cost, but you're looking at that impact on top line, which ultimately is going to affect the business.
I think the other thing to consider, Gabby, is a lot of people hear nearshoring and they think closing down or shutting down operations and moving to Mexico and all the jobs are going to go. We actually have found that the more companies are able to grow in Mexico with the type of workforce they have, the cost of the workforce, it actually has also an increased benefit on the U.S. side to grow too. So it's not necessarily taking everything from the U.S. and moving into Mexico or another company or another country. But the other thing is you don't have to do the whole company. We have nearshoring relates to everything from contract manufacturing, CNC parts that are small components that then get assembled on the U.S. side, or you could have several operations or certain components being made in Mexico. And every step you get closer to having full operations within your control, the better your supply chain is going to be resilient.
That is an excellent point, Arnold. And I think the message I tell people when they ask me on nearshoring, I think this new generation has gotten accustomed to short trades. And they do an action and they want to see a very fast reaction. We need patience. These are tectonic shifts. They are relentless, they are irreversible, They are definite, but they take time. I wouldn't be surprised if next year China surpasses again Mexico as the main trade partner. It doesn't mean anything. What we have to look at is the long term trend driven by macroeconomic and social political fundamentals, which is kind of our point. Um, the reality also is that today Mexico has a lower installed capacity than it needs to serve the US market. Think about aluminum. We have a huge problem in aluminum prices compared to China or to India. Think about copper, no? Think about assembly of electrical vehicles. Yeah, we know it, and I think we're seeing a lot of primary investments happen, both from local companies, U.S. companies, and Chinese companies. And soon enough, we will have that resilient and complete supply chain that is able to fulfill those liquidity gaps. However, we need time, and we need time for these investments to materialize. In the meantime, there are many things that can already be done in Mexico, and we're doing a lot of them together. I would say anything that requires welding, stamping, bending, punching, laser cutting, painting, galvanizing, or any sheet metal transformation process, Mexico is not only a great alternative, but it's significantly cheaper than China. Industrial equipment companies manufacturing different OEMs to serve specific purposes are a great target customer for us. Everything regarding machining, Mexico is fairly competitive compared to China. In molds, we're starting to see investments flow into better molding techniques in Mexico to close that gap. Plastic injection, Mexico is extremely competitive. The plastic not, maybe we have to import the plastic and import the mold, but the injection process can happen here at a fairly decent cost. My point is retail furniture, for example, everything related to furniture. When you have to start mixing wood with metal, with glass, Mexico is extremely competitive. Steel fabrication for larger steel structures. If you need to build something in the US and you have to send the prefabricated steel welding components, Mexico is extremely competitive. There are parts where we still need to build a supply chain, and I think every year we will get closer to having a very complete portfolio of things that allow us to compete with China in every angle. But I think patience is the name of the game, and understanding how relentless this change is going to be is fundamental. No?
I think also another industry that's being affected a lot by this is some lighter vehicles like ATV, golf carts. You're talking about things that take up a lot of space on a container. So you're shipping a lot of air from China when that happens. Whereas from Mexico, even if you ship the components to Mexico and assemble them, you're still talking about saving yourself a lot of dead space that you would be shipping otherwise. And the more you look at sourcing in Mexico, the more you see that these manufacturers are opening their eyes to the possibility of making more and more of those components. Some of our clients that we're looking at now, their main goal is let's start in Mexico by sourcing a few things. And then let's keep sourcing until we're possibly 70, 80, 90% domestic product, whether it's from Mexico or the United States. So I think there's a lot of advantages of the nearshoring trend. And I think a lot of the large manufacturers are taking advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes for companies that maybe have never done business in Mexico, it might seem overwhelming to think about, making key components of a machine, right? Or, making your entire product. Maybe it's a light vehicle, but it's like the product you're selling, right? And so I think that's when companies like the Nearshore company or Prima come in and say, hey, I am going to be the one to figure this out for you, right? If you're looking to manufacture a specific product and you don't know how to navigate that ecosystem, then Prima can help you figure out who has the technical capabilities, right? Where does it make sense to invest? Where does it make sense to, manufacture in Mexico versus elsewhere? And then you can go to a company like the Nearshore company and say, how do I navigate governmental roadblocks that I may have when I, set up shop, or regulatory issues, or tax implications of exporting and importing, right? And I think that's where having potential companies that want to come to Mexico understand that it's relatively easy to come and figure it out and start slowly, that's when we can come in and kind of ease the worry that some of our viewers may have of considering nearshoring to Mexico.
And I think there's two things to keep in mind. When you talk about the nervousness, we've had that from small companies that are moving their whole operation down there, and to them, it's moving their whole life down there, basically. But I've had operations where as soon as 6 weeks, a company has been able to start assembling products and operating in Mexico. And you go from there to large companies where you can leverage the nearshore company, its partners like Prima that helps us on the manufacturing side, other partners that the nearshore company has in logistics and customs brokerage. And it really is a turnkey operation for a lot of companies where they either have one person down there who's running the operation, or for example, the PPE company that I go back to, it's been 13 years since I've stepped foot in Mexico. We do all of the manufacturing for them. We do the distribution. We even do the order fulfillment for them. So we're able to provide services and leverage, with the help of companies like Prima, the manufacturing and the assembly of a lot of their components.
One of our top customers, Michael, he sits in Arkansas. He's 65 years old. He's thinking about retirement now, has grandkids. Spent 20 years traveling every 3 months to China, building a very resilient supply chain for their product. And one day, the board of directors of his company decided they wanted to source 25% of their production from Mexico. If you're Michael and they tell you that, what do you do? Like, okay, do I have to go back to my 40s and start doing what I did with that energy? Should I retire early? Should I train someone? And that's exactly when we met him. We said, hey, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is call us. We're your one-stop shop in Mexico. Once you trust us, you can trust the entire ecosystem because we'll vet it, develop it, manufacture and inspect for you, and we will deliver your product. This is an industrial equipment company that I'm talking about in Arkansas. So to them, we continue to scale with them. And literally, he was here once. That's it. We showed him the factories. We walked around. And at the end of the day, they're dealing with us. We're a U.S. registered company. They know what we're up to. And it makes their lives much easier so they can trust our country. And we honestly, we don't need to hide where the factories are. We'll send the address. We'll put everyone in a WhatsApp group. I think the value proposition is not about discovery or of supply. I think it's about increasing the reliability of the ecosystem in a more simple way, simplifying their lives, increasing reliability, and to the extent we can, also providing more efficiency, either in cost, engineering, or different processes and areas.
And demystifying the process, right, Daniel? Not making it as such a obscure, who knows what to do type of process, but clarify it for them. And once you do, it opens up a world of opportunities for them.
Yeah.
I think something that's interesting, Danny, that you mentioned was that at some point, and it's getting better, but OTIF, on time in full delivery, on average, and it's an anecdotal number, but it's around 30-40%, right? And we're saying we want to help companies with the reliability on the Mexican ecosystem, right? And so OTIF cannot be 30%. Can you talk a little bit more about what we do to get that OTIF to 95, 100%?
Yeah, for sure. So the reason OTIF is broken is not a single person's fault. This is an ecosystem issue. So when you start drilling down in what's happening, for example, it turns out that semi-trailers, when you're talking about platforms, the ecosystem hasn't had Amazon or Mercado Libre developing it. So the platform transportation continues to be extremely inefficient, pulverized, and you don't have one single consolidated player in the country in the platform business. So you have to go deal with informality. That's no longer true for dry box because you had Mercado Libre and Amazon develop a bunch of great players with DHL and FedEx, etc. That's one. Another one is raw material sourcing. So raw materials, for example, constitute 40 to 50% of the cost of our goods. They constitute 30 to 40% of the cost of our goods sold. And the reality is that we have to procure them in mass to provide a cost advantage, no, and ensure that the materials arrive on time, which is essential. No, so it's many pieces put together that cause the OT. But if you don't go super deep into the solution, it's very hard to provide a differentiated effort. So at Prima, what we do is go into engineering, procurement, raw material sourcing, logistics to be able to provide this differentiation.
And I think it's important because if the traditional China model, which is I have this part and give me a price for this part, you go to China and you take a mouse or you take any, it has multiple components, and one person will give you the price for that component and they'll figure everything out in the back end. In Mexico, we haven't gone to that point yet. We still have companies that say, "Oh, great, you want to make a mouse? Well, I'll do the plastic injection molding for it, but I can't do anything else."
Yeah.
But companies like Prima can then have all the different technologies and help with the assembly part and finalize that last component of integrating everything together. And once you tie that into the advantages of nearshoring and assembly right on the border, it provides a very, I think, future-proof potential for being able to compete with China with their pricing.
I agree.
Do you think the road to nearshoring is different for a company, and how so for a company that's thinking about moving some production to Mexico from Asia versus from the US? What are the different things that they're worried about? Or is there, does it matter?
I think it depends on why they're doing it, because you see a different combination of things. You have companies that they have, like Daniel says, the board says you have to move X% to Mexico. They see that now's the time, and they're pushing that agenda. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, companies that are trying to get out of China, but are smaller and need to be more competitive. It's much harder to go and say, I'm going to take my, $3 inflatable ball and make it in Mexico and have the same exact price where they've been making it for decades in China. But there are companies, especially the ones that have the better supply chains and have the most experienced people in that area, that understand that it's a balancing act. If it cost $1 in China and it cost $1.20 in Mexico, then they know it's going to be $1.10, and they're happy with that $1.10.
Yeah,
But,
I'd say that the increment we're seeing as baseline in cost, Arnold, and I think it's going to go down over time. But I don't know if you would agree with me that it's between 20 and 30% from the Chinese cost to start with,
depending on the manufacturing process, but you're correct. Yes.
particularly for certain assemblies, no, that we
Yes.
have to continue to optimize over time. Which, by the
And
way, Arnold,
also,
it brings me to a great phenomenon that I think we haven't touched upon, but I always call it the great appendix to the New York Times nearshoring article, which is what is China going to do? No, so China is not just going to let their manufacturing power go away. The response to the actions is gigantic, and we are seeing them set up shop throughout the country. And we're seeing them build industrial parks in Mexico. Today, they're exclusively doing it as Chinese suppliers for the Chinese companies. But also looking at the political environment, we're seeing that these Chinese companies in Mexico are going to start to get a heavier, more stringent regulation. So as these regulatory burdens kick in, it's going to be extremely interesting to see how the ecosystem shakes up to respond. Um, I think we live in the most interesting of times in terms of supply chain. And at the end of the day, what has to happen is our engineers and our local workforce has to get better training, and hopefully we're contributing to that to be able to compete, and those processes get installed, and revenue gets shared between all parties. And at the end of the day, the consumer benefits by having a more reliable supply chain that ensures goods are delivered on time.
I agree. I think the one issue with China that they can't overdo, or they can't solve as a company, as a country, is that their population is aging. Mexico has the youngest population in the world at an average of 29 years. You can make more roads, you can make more infrastructure, you can't produce more people. So I believe that even if you could, someone born today would take 20 years to be a productive workforce person. So it's very difficult to be able as a country to fight that part of the equation.
Particularly for blue collar workers,
Correct.
So when you think about truck drivers, welding, these jobs that honestly they're hard, and I can understand why in the U.S. nobody wants to weld and nobody wants to drive a truck, and you're seeing more developed economies shift towards services and value-added engineering. In Mexico, we're going to enter a phase. We're going to work very hard to expand our capabilities, and people here want to work, and we have amazing welders and amazing drivers and amazing blue-collar workers that are increasingly getting a more secure job, stabilizing their family, and making a generational change by skilled workforce. And I think if we can enable that, we're in the right phase of our economic development. To comment.
For sure. I think we're going to near the end, and we're going to open it to some Q&A. But before we do that, you both talked about specific examples of companies that are benefiting and from nearshoring and are moving their operations to Mexico. Would love to, open it to sharing a couple more real life stories.
Well, I think the important and the amazing thing is the wide range of companies. In our portfolio, we have, digital printing, we have industrialized products, we have even companies that do stickers. So it's, textiles, it's all different sorts of companies. And you see it now with the creation of these clusters in Mexico. We have aerospace clusters, you have automotive clusters, and the vast amount of engineers, that are coming out of Mexico is amazing.
Good. We have for example, one of the largest EV charging station distributors in the U.S. They have their software, they had the integration tools, and they were basically putting all pieces together. We're making the entire weldment base. We're making the entire part that goes into there, so they can just plug in their technology. And I think that's going to be the reality for all industrial companies. For example, all of them are going to have their technology, and probably that technology, that high-end manufacturing, will continue to be developed in the U.S. If not, if you look at the titanium economy trend, that's where the economy is shifting. However, everything needs a casing, and everything needs a bunch of auxiliary pieces that prevent you from shipping a super complex, super expensive part. That's what we're specializing today, and hopefully in the future we can also integrate the advanced technology on the electronic components. But in the meantime, it's a great way to build that part of the supply chain in Mexico, where we have the capabilities to do it. Oh, hi, Gali.
Hey everyone, I'm back. Thanks so much for the discussion. We had a lot of questions, so I'm going to have to only pick a lucky few. Okay, here I have one from Natalie, and I think Arnold, this will be best to direct with you, and of course, the team from Prima can answer or supplement as well. But Natalie asks, what are the key factors to consider when choosing a location for a manufacturing facility in Mexico?
Yeah, it's funny that a lot of companies that come to Mexico and want to come to Mexico already have some predetermined location that they feel in their head would be best, and a lot of them are the typical ones you hear about. The Monterrey, the Querétaros, and they go visit there, they love it, and they want to plant there. But when you really are choosing this, it's a big decision, and you've got to look at your whole supply chain. A lot of people believe the supply chain all the way to the plant is what's important, but you've got to go from the raw material origin points to the end customer and look at the logistics side of it, look at the ports. When you're dealing with different regions, you look at labor stability, whether there's enough utilities in those locations and infrastructure. So it's important to take a big picture look at the country and not get any predetermined or conceptions in your head as to where exactly you think it should be. I think you need to come in with an open mind, and sometimes you'll be surprised about where the best place for you is. I keep asking for more and more nearshoring in Cancun, but it hasn't happened because I would love to spend more time there.
Well, you
I would
have
vote-
you have Laredo and Matamoros, Arnold.
Yes, I do. That's right.
I would vote for Baja California, but we can work on those beachfront locations. And then I think we have time for one more question, and I'll let anyone open this. But Laura asked, what are the common pitfalls companies face when starting manufacturing operations or moving their sourcing to Mexico?
Well,
Yeah,
I can start with the few that I've seen, because we do deal with a lot of companies that come in and don't understand some of the aspects of it. A funny story I have is I have a client that we opened up a facility for them, and one of the first things their plant manager from the U.S. did is go in there and paint all of the poles in a yellow color. And the EHS team came in and said, "What are you doing with the poles in yellow?" And he says, "Well, that's what OSHA tells you to do. The poles are yellow." And it's like, no, in Mexico, yellow is reserved for, pneumatic insulations, and blue is for certain things, and green, and they come sometimes with this preconceptions of the way it is in the U.S. is the way it is in Mexico. I think that part of it, cultural assimilation into the area, is something that sometimes becomes troublesome for some of the clients. I think those are the biggest pitfalls. Believe it or not, it's not necessarily the regulations and those things that trip people up. A lot of time it comes down more to the cultural differences and the differences in how it's done in the U.S. compared to Mexico.
Like Danny, Gabby, anything to add to that point that you've seen on the Prima side?
I think just I want to drop that the biggest benefit is, remember, without Prima, without the nurture company, and if you just go straight to the suppliers, probably you get a solution, but you will have to find a needle in the haystack if you want to have a high reliability rates over 90%. If not, the reality is that you will face a 30% margin if they want to quote with you, because they have been burned before by customers, and you will have to do a lot of the working capital fronting to be able to do it. No, so we believe there's ways to source Mexico, and we're happy to help U.S. companies navigate the ecosystem. We think this is kind of how other countries were built, but integrating the model and through technology, allowing it to scale. We believe that this is the great way to do it, and we're happy to work with you in a customized, tailored way to ensure that that companies are able to build that supply chain.
I also believe that we're a strong proponent against what's called a soft landing, which is just showing up here, having someone create an entity for you, and you start doing business in Mexico without some kind of a guide. Whether it's an operation like ours, whether it's a shelter operation, whether it's a company like Prima, it coming in on your own without knowing these things is very difficult. I had one individual that came from an Asian company that said he believes 92% of the companies from his country that have failed in Mexico have been because they tried to do it on their own without any help. So the little bit that goes into that extra amount to pay for a company with our services or Prima services is a small amount, and we have to prove our value. And an average shelter client is 4 years. We've been blessed that our clients have averaged 13 and a half years for us. And it's up to us to provide that value for them. And if we don't provide it, then they leave. I believe the same thing Daniel would agree. If he does not provide enough value for his clients, I believe he wouldn't be disappointed, but he would understand if they were to leave him for somebody else. It's up to us as Mexican entities and companies to prove our value to the rest of the world and to bring nearshoring to this country.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone. That's all the time we have for today, unfortunately. So thank you, Arnold, Gabby, and Daniel, and to the Nearshore Company and Prima for sharing all of your insights. A reminder, this is just our first of many webinars between Prima and the Nearshore Company. So stay tuned for more speakers and hearing on more insights. And here you can find the information to contact both the Nearshore Company and Prima. So here, find those email addresses. You can scan that QR code, or of course find us on LinkedIn or our websites. So thanks again, and talk soon on Nearshoring.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.